Herodotus lived during the 5th century before the Common Era in ancient Greece. He wrote a narrative summarizing history as it was then known and describing many of the events of his own lifetime. Although direct discussion on his biases and epistemology is saved for the conclusion of the series, on this video you may learn details about a portion of his work. The 8th book, called Urania, Part 2 of 2, Xerxes Flees. In the first part of this book, the Greek allies crushed the Persian navy on a battle adjacent to the island of Salamis. Uncertain of how to deal with the defeat, Xerxes, the Persian king, asked Artemisia to give him advice. You will remember that Artemisia was the warrior queen from Halicarnassus. She told him that he should flee. She said that he could take solace in the fact that he had burned Athens. On Xerxes' satisfaction with her advice, the writer makes the most astute psychological observation. Consider the lines.
With this advice, Xerxes was greatly delighted, since she succeeded in saying that very thing which he himself was meaning to do. For not even if all the men and all the women in the world had been counseling him to remain, would he have done so, as I think. So much had he been struck with terror.
Alas, says I, it is likewise with most humans' introspections and analyses. To most people, the correct coincides with the self-pleasing. The historian also describes how all in Xerxes' entourage were afraid of the king's reaction or repercussion, especially Mardonius. He was the hawkish general that had not only insisted on invading Greece, but also on fighting the naval battle. As such, Mardonius asked the king permission to stay in Greece for the purpose of continuing the land campaign with the elite corps of the Persian army. Xerxes agreed, perhaps happy to be rid of Mardonius' unproductive haughtiness. He allowed him 30,000 soldiers. By the way, Mardonius was quick to lay blame on the Phoenicians and Egyptians, rather than on himself or the Persians. Herodotus then makes a most harrowing digression that is tangential to a renunciation of slavery. He tells of a certain man named Hermodomos who,
of all persons whom we know up to this time, obtained the greatest revenge for a wrong done to him.
This man was captured as a young boy, made into a eunuch, and sold as a slave to the Persians. Horrible fate, except for the fact that he grew up as a favorite of the royal court and thus traveled with the army during their invasion of Greece. Here, he found the man that mutilated him. He pretended amiability towards the culprit, telling him about all the good that had come to him, and invited the man, with his family, to dine. The man believed him, or felt compelled, and at dinner he, the eunuch, changed his demeanor and forced the man to do the surgery to his own children. Not satisfied, the eunuch then had the children do the surgery to their own father. Herodotus' methodology is filled with such socio-cultural accounts. Things such as this story are far from mere trivia. They fall in line with his intent to mention the small and the large, given as all things change. Okay, back to the narrative. The Greeks debate whether they should close Xerxes' retreat. Eurybiades, the Spartan commander-in-chief, is against it. Agreeing with the Spartan, Themistocles, the great Athenian that Plutarch includes in his biographies, is quoted telling the Athenian people,
I myself also have been present before now on many occasions, and have heard of many more, on which something of this kind came to pass, namely that men who were forced into great straits, after they had been defeated fought again, and repaired their former disaster.
I should mention that, once the forces of Mardonius were destroyed and the devastation they wrought was repaired, the Spartan general argued that the combined Greeks should go on the offensive and conquer the Persian Empire. Of course, this is what all philosophers always counseled. As Xenophon describes, it was attempted by a Spartan, but as Diodorus Siculus relates, it would be a Macedonian that accomplishes it. Moving away from socio-cultural remarks, Herodotus now makes some political insinuations. He says that Themistocles sent message to Xerxes warning him that the allies intended to destroy the bridge across the Hellespont. The historian believes he did this so as to buy favor with the Persians in the expectation that he might need their safety in the future, which of course, he did. Yes, later Themistocles is ostracized and ends up living under the tutelage of Xerxes. Yet, as Plutarch points out, he never waged war against the Greeks and instead killed himself when such a time arose. Nonetheless, the present historian says,
Themistocles, then speaking thus, endeavored to deceive them, and the Athenians followed his advice. For he had had the reputation even in former times of being a man of ability, and he had now proved himself to be in truth both able and of good judgment. Therefore they were ready in every way to follow his advice when he spoke.
As such, Herodotus demonstrates his politics. He does not like Themistocles. It is hard to envision what about him he may not have liked. It is possible that Herodotus is simply playing the audience, meaning he might simply be writing what he expects most readers wish to read. Anything is possible. Either way, let me point out that telling the Persians about the Greeks' plan was possibly a good thing. After all, wishing for Xerxes to flee, giving him such a warning amounted to showing him the open door. Aside from the aforementioned, Herodotus also relates how Themistocles insisted that the Athenians tax another city. As such, he started the practice of foreign taxation. I should note, for it is jocular, Themistocles told the men of Andrus that Athens had the divinities called persuasion and compulsion to make them pay, and cleverly the men of Andrus replied that since they had those of poverty and helplessness they could not. Be it as it may have been, the Athenian Empire is definitively uncommendable. Not that such a practice should be laid on democracy, rather culture, time period, and in part the Athenian allies themselves. This is best understood analyzing Thucydides' history of the Pan-Hellenic War. Herodotus describes Xerxes' march back and how Mardonios decided to make camp in Thessaly. The Persian general aimed to retake Athens after the winter. As for Xerxes' march, it was horrible. The barbarian army was not only struck with famine, but also plague. There is a digression about a Thracian king that literally blinds his own children as punishment for having joined the Persian force. Oh yeah, there is a possible account wherein Xerxes himself tried to sail, rather than march, back to Persia. In this voyage, if it truly happened, a storm struck wherein Xerxes asked the sailors to jump overboard so as to lighten the load. The historian doubts the story, but it is emblematic of tyranny. The narrative then turns back to Themistocles. He was voted as second greatest by all the commanders. Yet, since all voted for themselves as first, technically none won the vote. LOL. Nonetheless, the Athenian was regarded as being the best or most useful, the MVP. He was given honors in Sparta and at the Olympic Games. Jocular how, when a political opponent accused him of only being famous because of Athens, he replied,
I tell thee thus it is, if I had been a native of Belbina, I should never have been thus honored by the Spartans, but neither wouldest thou, my friend, for all that thou art an Athenian.
To end this account, there is the story of a certain Alexander, king of the then subjected Macedonians. Herodotus relates the mythical story of how Macedonia was founded. Skipping over that, the historical narrative regards Mardonios' hope of allying with the Athenians. Yes, he hoped that with their navy he could conquer all of Greece, and in exchange the Athenians would be left as the governors. The previously mentioned Alexander was sent to convey this offer to the Athenians. The Spartans worried, not the least because an oracle had once prophesied that if the Athenians united with the Medes, then Sparta would be conquered. Thus, they offered the Athenians all the friendship and aid in rebuilding what they could, adding,
You know that in barbarians there is neither faith nor truth at all.
Meaning, you cannot trust any deal with the likes of Mardonios. The Athenians in turn replied that the Spartans should not worry us.
So long as the sun goes on the same course by which he goes now, we will never make an agreement with Xerxes. But we will go forth to defend ourselves against him, trusting in the gods and the heroes as allies, for whom he had no respect when he set fire to their houses and to their sacred images.
Let me also quote part of what they sent to Mardonios in reply.
We must necessarily avenge to the very utmost rather than make an agreement with him who did these deeds. Then secondly there is the bond of Hellenic race, by which we are of one blood and of one speech, the common temples of the gods and the common sacrifices, the manners of life which are the same for all.
You got to love it. Though, alas, The subsequent Pan-Hellenic War is essentially proof or sign that even if the likes of belligerent and ugly extraterrestrial aliens showed up, humanity would nonetheless not unify. There is only one book remaining in Herodotus' Histories. If you wish to know how the Athenians and the Spartans defeated Mardonius Persians, watch the next videos. If you do not know how we got to this point, you really should not miss all the prior. Now, to pique your curiosity, to motivate you to watch the last video of the series, I gift you a teaser sample of one of the many aphorisms I crafted as I read this author.
The epitome of foolishness is never considering death. Disagreement between democracies is worse than even a bad agreement.
If you enjoy or gain from my aphorisms, know that I have thousands. I will be writing books with short thematic essays composed out of aphorisms. These essays are profound and intriguing yet easy to read. For very cheap copies, look up Protagoras Pause in the Amazon website. I repeat, Protagoras Pause, that's my name.